Hi there, I'm Coley. This is Sweet Peaches Nutrition, and today we're making mushroom stroganoff. This is another one of those recipes that I remember from childhood. I loved beef stroganoff, but I didn't like the beef. I would just eat around it and eat the sauce because it tasted so good. And so I really wanted to make a mushroom version that packed all the flavor but was plant-based. And I think I did a pretty good job. So you'll notice throughout this recipe that I really focus a lot on adding different umami flavors to kind of replicate the meaty taste. So keep watching to find out how to make mushroom stroganoff.
So step one for mushroom stroganoff is mushrooms. So you have two options. If your stems are really dirty and gross, you can go ahead and just take them off and just use the caps in your recipe. But if you have stems that are fine and the texture doesn't bother you, then you can just leave them on and cut up the stems into your soup as well. It really is up to your choice. If I don't use the stems in my recipes, often I save them in the freezer to make vegetable stock because they add a really nice flavor. So you're just going to go ahead and quarter your mushrooms and do that for the entire pack. Usually if I'm keeping the stem, I'll put the top side down so I have a flat surface to work, and if I break the stem off, then I usually put it down on that flat surface. So whatever makes it easier so that you don't have to chase your mushrooms around the cutting board, as you can see here. And you'll notice that these mushrooms are really white. That means that they're fresh, and that's a good choice to buy at the store. So when we have all our mushrooms cut up, we're going to set those aside for later and finish chopping the rest of our ingredients. Our next ingredient is a shallot. It's kind of like a small onion, so we're going to cut it in the same way. So we're going to cut directly down the center of our shallot. It can sometimes be a little tricky to cut through the papery skin, so you might have to apply a little more pressure. And then we're going to cut off the top part, but we're going to leave the root intact so that it'll hold the shallot together. And then we're going to peel off the papery skin like you would an onion, and just peel off as many layers until you get rid of the papery feeling skin and get more to the center of the shallot. So sometimes they can be a little weird in the way they're formed. You can see this one is almost formed in two pieces, so I'm actually going to have to go in and remove the papery part from the middle of that shallot as well. So, like I said, we're going to leave the root intact, and we're going to cut this down like we're cutting strips, like juliennes, but we're not going to go all the way through. We're just going to go almost to the root so that it all stays together and it makes it easier to chop. And then as I chop down horizontal to the root, you can see I get nice little diced pieces. And feel free to flip it over onto a flat side whenever that makes it easier to cut. It's always easiest to cut for a flat surface. And like I said, this piece I'm going to treat almost as if it's two little shallots because of the way it was formed. But you really just don't want that papery skin in there for texture purposes. It's not going to taste as good, but it won't hurt you. And it's also great to save for stock. Alright, so once we have our shallot all diced and moved out of the way, we're going to move on to garlic. I love garlic, and I think it's impossible to have too much, so go with your heart on how many cloves you prefer. I'm going to use 3 for this recipe, so you can see I just break them off from the head, and then using the side of my knife, first I'm going to peel off all the extra little papery bits, and then using the side of my knife, I'm going to press down and kind of smash the garlic, which serves 2 purposes. First, it makes it easier to remove the skin. You can see the skin kind of breaks away from the clove. And also by smashing the garlic, you release one of the flavor and possible health benefit compounds called allicin. It kind of the trauma to the clove causes this chemical to form. So by smashing your garlic and then dicing it and setting it aside before you use it, you kind of activate that allicin. So you can see I'm just peeling off the papery bits, and then if the end of it is kind of fibrous, I'll cut it off if it's pretty small. It's not that big a deal. Also, if you notice any parts that look less than great, a little brown spot or whatever, you can cut it off. It's just up to personal preference. And then I'm going to mince this garlic. So first I'm cutting little strips down the garlic. You can see I'm going to do all of the cloves I'm using to first just kind of chunk it up. And then after I've done slicing, I'm going to pull it all into a pile, and then I'm going to use a kind of chopping hammery motion and rock my knife through the pile to mince it up. So you can see I just kind of move through the pile and then scrape it all back up and do it again. I'm holding the tip of my knife on the cutting board, and I'm just lifting up and down with the handle to chop this. You can also use, if you have a garlic press, that's up to you. You can use that. I find they're sometimes more trouble than they're worth because it all gets stuck up in there. But if that's easier than mincing for you, I do recommend using fresh garlic. You can buy it in a jar, but I just don't think you get the same flavor. So if you really like a garlic flavor, it's best to use fresh garlic, in my opinion. But you do you, and whatever works best for your budget and your time constraints. Okay, so I'm feeling good about that mince now, and I'm just going to go ahead and scrape it up and put it into my bowl. Now, this is not the best way to take care of your knife by scooping up things off your cutting board, I will admit, but I am guilty. All right, now we're at the stove. We're ready to cook. We have all of our vegetables prepped. So I'm setting this pan to medium-high heat, and I'm just going to add a little bit of oil into the pan so that I can start to saute up my veggies. So I'm going to start with my shallot. I want this guy to cook until it becomes translucent. So I'm going to cook out the water. Sometimes it's called sweating your vegetables. I don't want to get too much like browning on them, and I definitely am not trying to like caramelize them. So we're just gonna stir those guys around and start to get them cooking. All right, so now that our shallots are starting to cook down, we're gonna add in our mushrooms next. And this may look like a crap ton of mushrooms, but don't worry, they are mostly water and they will cook down and release their liquid a lot. And so that liquid will not only add a great flavor to our sauce, but also these guys are going to shrink probably about half their size. So my pan may look a little small, and it may be a little small for this, but definitely those mushrooms are going to shrink down. Sometimes I'm still surprised how much they shrink down when I cook with them. So I'm just going to stir those around and get them spread out evenly over the pan. So you just want to stir periodically to make sure that, if your shallots are starting to stick to the pan, that you're moving them around, and that your mushrooms are getting evenly distributed, because there's going to be like a hot spot in your pan, probably towards the center where the flame is. And so you kind of want to keep everybody moving and distributed so that they all cook evenly. And if you notice it's starting to stick too much or even like brown or burn a little bit, just turn down your heat. You can also cover your mushrooms to help speed up the cooking process a little bit. Yes, this lid is too small for the pan, but yes, it also helped. So you can see now that these guys are starting to brown up, and they are also reducing in size. And so, like I said, just stirring periodically to keep everybody cooking consistently, but just keep an eye on it. All right, now we're getting somewhere. We're going to add in our garlic now. You don't want to add in the garlic too soon because it can burn really easily. So I've waited until my onions have completely cooked down, and you can see now that I have liquid in the pan. That's from our mushrooms releasing their liquid. And so now is a good time to add in our garlic so that it can cook, but it won't burn. And so, like I said, just continuing to kind of spread everybody around so we get even cooking. And you can see that we've got a little bit of a simmer going in that mushroom liquid. Now I'm going to use the vegetable better than bouillon to add a really nice umami flavor to this. You can use whatever broth you want, but I have found that using vegetable broth gives this a very distinct carroty taste, and it didn't really work as well as this did, because beef stroganoff, you really have an umami flavor, and I was trying to replicate that here. So I'm adding in flour to thicken this up. And you're gonna wanna stir this in. I started out with this spoon, but you're probably gonna need a fork or a whisk to get clumps out. You just wanna work the flour into the liquid and get any big clumps out. So I'm just stirring it around, making sure that the mushrooms that got coated in flour, it gets incorporated and things like that. And you can also see that it kind of lightens up the color as well. All right, so now I'm gonna go in with a fork and get those clumps because nobody wants a clumpy sauce. That's just gross. All right, so you can see we have a little bit of a simmer going, which is great, and we're gonna add in our soy sauce. Soy sauce is a great umami flavor additive to our dish, and then we're gonna also add some Dijon and miso. Miso is also a great vegetarian umami flavoring. So if you're not familiar, umami is the flavor of like protein, and it kind of has like a salty, a meaty quality to it, and it's often associated with meat. And so vegetarian dishes that are trying to mimic meat dishes, I find are often missing that umami component. And so when I was developing this recipe, I wanted to think of as many ways to add that umami punch as possible to really get that stroganoff taste. And actually mushrooms themselves are a vegetarian umami flavor source, and that's often why I feel like you'll find mushrooms in things. So really trying to amp up that umami flavor. And the miso can be kind of thick to stir in, so if you have to get it off your spoon like I did and stir it around, that's a great idea. And now we have a sauce going on. That looks delicious. So you're gonna want it to simmer, but you don't want it to get too wild, so you can turn down your heat if it's bubbling too much. Don't forget to salt and pepper your dishes. So I'm going in with my salt and pepper too. Don't forget. But do actually remember that if you added soy sauce that's high in sodium, that is going to add a salty flavor. So you might need a little less salt in this situation, but it's always a good idea to taste your food, see how it's tasting, and where you might need to adjust it if it needs a little more salt or pepper or, whatever you're feeling. You're the chef. You get to decide. All right, so now I'm just going to give this a stir to make sure everything is incorporated. And like I said, you always got to taste it, and it's tasting great. So just going to make sure everything is cooking evenly, that we're not sticking to the bottom of the pan. And like I said, if you need to turn your heat down, that's not a bad idea. Okay, so now we're adding in the creamy factor. I'm using this Mioikos vegan cream cheese. You could also use a vegan sour cream. Or if you are pro-dairy, then you can use sour cream. It's totally up to you and whatever you're feeling. I went for the chive version because I tried the original Mioikos one, and it just tasted way too much like coconut and was too sweet for me. But I found this chive one was more preferable, in my opinion. And so this is another kind of chunky ingredient to add, so I'm just going to mix it around, and as it starts to melt and get it to evenly incorporate into my sauce. All right, now you can see that it is tasting good. It is well incorporated, so I'm going to turn off the heat, make sure I got any last chunks of that sour cream out, and we are ready to serve. So you're going to serve this up with the pasta of your choice, and then just go ahead and pour your sauce over your pasta. I am using the bonza pasta that's made from garbanzo beans. It's gluten-free and it's a pretty good source of protein, so that's my go-to pasta lately, but you can use whatever pasta you prefer. And if you are not afflicted by the gluten, traditionally stroganoff is served with egg noodles, but I have yet to find a gluten-free egg noodle. So I'm just mixing this up. So if you're not using egg noodles, I really like rotini because I feel like it catches the sauce up in the noodles. But now you are ready to share this delicious mushroom stroganoff with you and your friends. So I'm just going to serve it up. It's great topped with black pepper, some basil, and enjoy!